I have no doubt. Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another Fake Accents Unite. It's the second one of the new year, is it? No, it must be the we did one New Year's Eve, didn't we? Did we?
Yes, it must have been. Yes, it was New Year's Eve, if you remember.
Yes, that was right. New Year's Eve. And now we find ourselves tumbling tumultuously into the next decade.
Yes, I must ask, just given your opening here, good evening! I just wonder, have you ever considered a job as a town crier?
It was a ring. Hear ye, as the bell rings.
You're very much in that territory, yes.
Well, speaking of the bell, I'm kind of a bit like Pavlov's dog, right, where he trained him to salivate at the sound of the bell, preparing food. My parents used to ring a bell to gather everyone to the table in the kitchen when I was growing up. And so, no, I can't do it because, of course, I'll just be dribbling down my tabard as I walk around.
I thought the people at Downton Abbey were posh, with the butler ringing the gong.
You say that. The bell was picked up from a farmer's market, and it didn't have a tong inside it. So what we did was we took a piece of steel wire, wrapped it round inside, and then tied a large nut to it.
There you go.
That would be a metal
word. Is that the technical word for it? Tong.
I believe so. Yes, but it's
because you see, there's a wonderful episode in a series of films. I will one day definitely be making a film review on at least the first one of them.
That's the hope.
Which is a series of films of Don Camillo and Pepone. And there is that moment where one of them sabotages the Communist Party bell so that it falls. And it just happens to fall as the other one is standing under it.
Oh, wow.
And the one thing that saves his life is that at the time there's no tong in it.
I see, so he's it's more a bell-shaped prison for him at that point.
Yes, a rather echoey bell-shaped prison. In fact, I think I once had a similar experience when, as a youth, way back in the Stone Age, I was playing football in a hall, a gym hall.
Yes.
But I don't know how familiar you are with old radiators. I mean, iron old radiators.
I haven't fixed any lately, but yes, I'm familiar with the type you're referencing.
But they've kind of got that body made up of, like, tubing.
Yes.
And if you think of it, with most of them, there's like a seam that runs down each one of those tubes.
Yeah.
Well, there was a collision that happened during the football, and one player went one way and the other player went the other way, and it just so happened that the other player fell sort of towards the centre of the gym hall, whereas I was flung towards the wall of the gym hall, which was where the radiator was.
Yeah.
And I therefore sort of collided head first with the back of the head into the radiator, and just sort of nicely onto that seam.
Yes, onto the
down the. So yes, I think you can gather I had a split head and a few stitches were needed.
I had
I distinctly remember the gonging sensation.
I remember
it was literally like a bell going off inside my head.
Good grief! I do remember I seemed to be a magnet for head injuries as a child, which explains a lot nowadays, obviously.
Yes, of course.
But I do remember several. So the first time, it was one of those things where you're at school and they tell you do not rock back on your chair. Don't rock back on your chair. I went straight back. I must have been perhaps 6 years old. And I went straight back, and I can still have, as crystal clear as the day it happened, I can see the ceiling of that particular classroom, and I can see the caretaker, because the teacher screamed and called the caretaker in, because I went straight back and hit my head on the corner of the table that was behind me, and of course that's a recipe for a split head.
You've just put a thought into my head there. and that is that more than likely the Pope who commissioned the Sistine Chapel ceiling
Yes.
was one who couldn't stop rocking back on his chair.
You just needed the... Yes, very good, Britisher. The chat is actually going, is this why you're wearing a helmet, Britisher? The pith is actually to hide your horrible disfigurement.
Yes, the radiator. I'm trying to disguise the radiator-shaped dent in the back of my head. Yes,
it's like sort of caved in. It's kind of like a fold. You've actually, if you look at you from above, it's kind of like a heart shape, where it's just gone into the back of you. You're still wearing the radiator, aren't you? You have to carry it around with you in the back of your head.
Yes, yeah, of course.
Oh dear.
No, but it really was one of those moments where. I mean, no doubt I will have been concussed, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
I went into it with some force.
I am aware of what you mean, yes.
And, of course, the radiators must have been bled, so they must have been hollow.
Yeah.
So as I hit that thing, it gonged. But the thing is that a minute or two later, I was still hearing the gonging sound.
Amazing. Sort of like, shall we call it concussion-induced tinnitus, as it were? Yes. I can see several people have decided to ask some questions in the chat, which are directly related to the way in which you live your life, British. Are you ready for this? So, Ryu Shinigami says, Britisher's PC is made from steam engine parts and Aleister Crowley spells. Thoughts?
Yes. Of course, yes. This is a steam-driven PC. Yes.
This is contrasted by Colin P. Smith, who says, "No, the Britisher doesn't have a computer. He has a Babbage difference engine." So that's the question.
Well, no, the Babbage difference engine is actually the supplier of some of the mathematical power to what one would otherwise call the CPU.
Mm-hmm. I see. The Greed the Avaricious says, my food pronouncement after AA's many ones. The 5 core items on any shopping list should be flour, pork, raisins, turnips, and leeks. Do you eat a lot of... And leeks! Yes, leeks is in
leeks.
The large...
He's just lost all credibility, that man.
You're not a fan of leeks, British?
Oh, dear God, no.
No, you don't like kind of like a pork and lentil stew, pork and leek stew even.
Or sort of, what is it, leek and potato soup and things. No, I don't. No, leek, no, I've never been able to get along with leeks.
You know, it's a no alcohol and no leeks. I'll remember that.
Yes.
And here...
It's more than likely due to, my, in a previous life, having been a leading politician or something, that leeks are how terrifying.
Yes, well, there was that, what was it, the Watergate scandal. Yes, of course, there was that. It's like... I'm trying to think.
Are you trying to say I'm Richard Nixon reborn?
Reborn? I didn't say anything about reborn, Richard. No, British. We will talk about food shortly. Agreed, but it's.
I mean, no doubt the subject surrounding most of this stream is going to be what do we think Soleimani's. Sorry, how did I come to Rouhani? But Qasim Soleimani's favourite foods were.
Well, of course, it's because you're a racist that you couldn't get his name right.
Yes, of course. I mean, they all sound the same to me.
You've been looking at his picture going, he looks awfully familiar, but they all look the same.
Yes, am I the only person, because nobody has mentioned it, am I the only person who looks at his pictures and sort of think, those eyes, there's something going on there.
With his eyes?
Yes.
Let me see if I can find a picture of him. I mean, he looks like a murderer, apart from that.
Yes, but there is a sort of certain droopiness of the upper eyelids.
Are you trying to say that he's actually a small basset hound?
Along those lines, yes. Well, he was.
What?
Well, perhaps you have not heard the recent news, but he is no more.
Yes, I know he's dead.
Yes, hence was.
Hence what? I see. I thought you were making another inference, and I was quite lost. A British Knight claiming that both of us seem to live in carry-on films. Judging the amount... No, it's called Life...
It's an absolutely outrageous claim to make.
I know.
Frankly, I am offended.
The Britisher doesn't have nearly enough large pulsating bosoms near him for it to qualify as a carry-on film.
Speak for yourself.
I speak quite happily for
you.
You.
Did you actually see my favourite tweet of the day today?
I haven't, but I would just point.
Which was my saluting I think one would refer to him as a country singer, would one? The Mr. McLean, the singer of American Pie.
Oh yes, Don McLean.
And I couldn't help but I was at the barber's recently to have my hair cut, and as you're waiting in line, you just basically have to make do with whatever reading material you can.
Yes, and it happened to be one.
It so happened to be the Sun newspaper, which, obviously being the Sun newspaper, could not help but focus on the shapely curves of Don McLean's girlfriend.
Good grief! Let me see if I can share this with...
And what can I say? This I just couldn't help but sort of point out that he's batting way above his average. But I mean, seriously... to the point where you just go, I am impressed.
Let me just... I'm going to put this up for the chat, because they deserve to see this. I can't share the Twitter feed, but I can put an image up. Let's just go for this. Bear with me. Yes, he does appear to be doing quite well for himself, shall we say?
I would say that he is someone, I think, who should be an example to us all in our he's the kind of man we would seek to emulate. I think it's fair to say.
He's doing well, yeah.
If at 74, you're still operating in that league, you're doing well.
I'm just trying to find this flipping picture that I've just saved, and it's just disappeared entirely off my hard drive, apparently.
I know the feeling. Trying to make the week that was. And whatever.
I'm just trying to bring a bit of sex appeal to fake accents here.
Use that picture, or I'll use this headline, and you save it, and the next thing you're sort of scouring your hard drive, trying to find where you've put it.
Goodness me! For goodness sake, let me. I'm going to make a new image using the power of Gaiazo clipping tool, so that it actually saves in the correct format, because Twitter doesn't like saving in the correct format.
Yes, it likes to change the ending of it, doesn't it?
Yeah, to J5, which is apparently the thing.
God.
So let me.
That's even worse.
There we go. Here we have. This is Don McLean's girlfriend, who's now on screen right now. Which is not bad, given that he is... How old would you say he is now, Britisher?
He is 74 years old.
74 years old. Good grief. What do you wonder what she sees in him? I know what he sees in her. That's what... Good grief.
Well, I mean, no doubt he is a very charismatic, gentleman.
He can also sing a 7-minute song with no difficulty whatsoever.
He knows how to. He obviously knows how to hold a tune and how to entertain a crowd. But yes, it really is. You're approaching pretty close to a perfect 10 there, aren't you?
The chat is saying clearly he spends 200k annually for her. Is he not? Is he not as hot as John Bercow's brother Alan? A patriot, I see.
I don't think many men can claim to be in the league of John Bercow's brother Alan.
No. As we all know, Alan Bercow is God's gift to women.
It would be funny if, how they've got like a 30-year requirement before they release government papers and whatever.
Yeah.
It would be funny if John Bercow's brother Alan, in 30 years' time, when the papers are revealed, turns out to have been kind of today's version of James Bond.
So very Casanova.
In real life. Yes.
Good grief. I'm feeling the need to burn the American flags.
But yes, no, I could not help but put that tweet out when I became aware of just how stellarly fortunate a man this was, to congratulate him, or to just express my respect.
I certainly feel like I need to share this news, this audacious news of yours, with as many people as possible. That's
yes, yeah. Then of course there was also I retweeted that there was the news that Clancy Brown is I think 61 years old today.
Okay.
And if you're not familiar with Clancy Brown, you more than likely have seen him in a film or two, but won't be aware of it. But then again, I mean, who am I speaking to here? Yes.
Anything's possible, Britisher.
Have you seen Starship Troopers?
Many times, yes.
Yes. So there is the instructor, the chap who stabs the other guy through the hand with a knife.
Oh, yes.
That's Clancy Brown.
I see, yeah.
Clancy Brown specialised in menacing big thugs, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
He had that kind of sort of brutish glare, as in, I'm going to eat you for breakfast. Therefore, they also had him as the chief guard in Shawshank Redemption.
Mm-hmm. Yes, I've actually seen that.
I think within the first 5 minutes, he kills a man.
Yes, well,
beats him to death.
I don't think it's the first 5 minutes. It's he does it. He gets people to beat him, but it's
the rather portly chap who breaks down at the very beginning when they arrive at the prison.
Yeah, and then of course there's the other chap at the end of the. He doesn't beat him to death, does he? But he never walks again. They beat the guy towards the end.
Yes, yeah.
Because it ruins his insurance thing.
But Clancy Brown, in my eyes, will always be Korgan. So basically, that is the kind of wild beast from the Russian steppes in Highlander.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
Who is the immortal who wants the prize.
Yes. I need to rewatch Highlander, actually.
I really think, yes, that is an unbelievable role. And yes, it's remarkable to think that this kind of, machine of a man now is 61 years old. But then again, not that means anything, because we have just seen demonstrated what a 74-year-old can do these days.
Oh, well, one would hope, essentially, apart from you, Britisher, who clearly wants to be drowning in crumpet until the day of his demise. Perhaps a steady relationship with someone you love would also be helpful.
Well, it's an option. There's one wonderful interview I always remember with Tony Curtis. Tony Curtis obviously was a famous ladies' man.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, I don't think it was ever confirmed, if you know what I mean, but I think everybody believed that he had an affair with Marilyn Monroe.
Mm-hmm.
And with quite a few leading ladies in Hollywood. And this didn't stop with advancing age.
I see, just kept going.
There was just this wonderful interview in which he must have been about 70 or something like that. And the interviewer touched upon his latest squeeze. That she is, we have heard she is a rather well-known young actress, and, she's rather young. And Tony Curtis just looked at him, smiled, that sort of cheeky grin of his, and just went, well, you see, quite a few of my friends have kind of approached me about the age of my latest girlfriend, and have said, look, isn't it dangerous? I mean, given your age and her age, and he said, well, in those situations, he always tends to reply with exactly the same thing.
Go on.
If she dies, she dies.
Goodness gracious. I'm sorry, chat's talking about how much you like tasty crumpets now, so just leave it at that. Greed the Avaricious says, if both of you live in carry-on films, I live in the nostalgic memories of Peter Hitchens about late Imperial Britain, that green and pleasant land. I would have to say...
you see, that is. I'm sorry if please go on, and then I will intercede.
I would... on Peter Hitchens' behalf or against him? I would have to say that Peter has always maintained that he's not a nostalgic. Because for many things he just sees himself as charting at the downfall, but he sees it as kind of inexorable and inevitable. He doesn't miss those times. He just knows what he would prefer to have happened because he prefers.
This is where I want to point out that it is not Peter Hitchens' land, that green and pleasant land. Mm-hmm. It is in fact my land. Because you see, Peter Hitchens and the likes are much too grim-faced and joyless and miserable ever to live in a land like that.
Look, Peter Hitchens, I'm sure, takes great pleasure when he eats his gruel. It's got all the nutrition that the human body needs. And then when he steps outside and he goes and wanders the land alone, I might point out.
Alone, yes.
Sort of. If his wife and he go out, no doubt they walk separately with a 5-minute time window, so that they never have to interact with one.
5 steps behind him. Yes.
Yes, and you can maintain this sort of solemn, kind of grim-faced but solemn appreciation of the harshness of the British countryside, even though it's quite soft and rolling. But yeah, I'm sure he's fine with that.
You see, and before the chat, whom I haven't followed too closely, but you assure me that they are now completely convinced of my living it up in crumpet 24/7. I make a distinct point of expressing my liking for the female form. A, because it annoys all the right people, namely the Peter Hitchens types and AA and other people. But at the same time, because I think it needs to be done. Because what we have ended up with in this intersectional superlative society is a situation in which somehow touching upon men appreciating women is being seen as somehow dirty and how shall we say, distemperate and distasteful.
Yes, you filthy misogynist, yes.
But funnily enough, all the other expressions... I mean, what was it? Layla Moran just having declared herself pansexual, and the BBC gushing at how wonderful that is.
What a non-word that it is, yes.
That's where you just sort of think, well, yes, all that stuff is supposedly wonderful and to be celebrated and to be... The other way round, for some reason, it is not to be seen as such. And we've somehow ended up in this strange inversion in which once upon a time it was those other forms of sexuality that were supposed to be kept in the closet and unspoken.
Well, it's one of those things where if you speak to anyone with any common sense, for instance, it is undeniable that women, when compared to men, certainly are the more beautiful creature when speaking about the human animal. And I think it's very... This is why we describe women as beautiful, and it's actually very rare to find a man who people would describe as beautiful, more of a rarer occurrence. There are other terms to describe them, of course, but when it comes to beauty as opposed to handsomeness or any other, or fit and athletic and so on and so forth, I think beauty comes into a category of its own, and I think women can be categorized as beautiful in a distinct and different way, and I think it's very important that we don't lose sight of that in the androgynous mess that is the current, shall we call it, atmosphere surrounding talking about men and women.
Therefore, I think it is important that, almost as a form of defiance towards the miserable gits on the right, but so particularly towards the kind of increasing insanity on the left that one continues to, if necessary in an exaggerated form, states one's appreciation of the female form.
Yes.
And then just watch them all get triggered.
And all its curves and bumps and lumps and all sorts, yes. No, I can appreciate that it is also done for effect, Britisher, don't you? But it's like, people in the chat saying if a man can be described as beautiful, he's probably going to be very feminine. Yeah, but
well, actually, while you were making that description of, when looking for the words, Roger Moore always liked to, with a smile on his face, refer to himself in his younger days as terribly pretty.
But I think it's quite clear as well. Like there, one of the things which, take a phenomenon of the recent times, right? Do you remember you get the Justin Bieber effect?
Yes.
And that sort of thing. I don't think anyone is describing Justin Bieber as a handsome man. He's a pretty boy, right? That's that was the thing at the time of when he was at the top of the charts.
Yes, it's a very rare thing that someone who has that appeal with girls of that age or younger, who then, when he gets older,
ages gracefully
to a man who has that same appeal to women of his age or younger, if you know what I mean.
Well, it's a different kind of...
I know what you mean.
It's a different kind of gravitas, isn't it? Because you have... Like, if you take someone like Henry Cavill, who's one of the kind of the principal... I don't know, like handsome men of the time.
Well, he's a Superman, isn't he?
Yes, he's very... It's very different. And I think there's a difference between that. And beauty, I think, is I think the only times where something which is kind of, I guess, not, I suppose, feminine or lithe or graceful is described as beautiful is when it's described as a terrible beauty. In that sort of thing, the aftermath of some horrible conflict, but it's all stopped now. And, the ruins of something, it's got a terrible beauty to it. But, I just, it's far less attributed to...
Yeah, I mean, with men in general, trying to quantify what actually makes attractiveness, I mean, that is clearly a physical attractiveness. There's no doubt about it. So when you come to the Henry Cavills and whatever, you have these square-jawed, muscle mounds. There's no doubt that is sort of heading towards the physical male ideal. But with the male, much more so than with the female, there is, and that's one of the things that the feminists always decry. But it's just one of these laws of attraction that none of us can quite understand.
So it's objectively true as well. I mean, if you look at, because of course there is the phrase "beauty is in the eye of the beholder," right? And but if you look at any of the research on beauty, there are standards which persist, even cross-culturally, to do with things like facial symmetry, and to do with things like cheekbones and their heights and so on and so forth. The biggest difference is actually between Western nations and the Far East Asian nations, and it's really funny. There's a kind of a Chinese version or a Japanese version of "Take Me Out." If you're familiar with the show, there are 50 women, and a guy comes on and basically makes a big fuss, and women, after every short segment...
So My Daily Life, really.
Obviously, Richard. They phase themselves out if they're not interested in him anymore. And at the end of it all, there are usually a number of women who are left who are willing to go on a date with the guy, and he can choose to do that. And he can choose which one he picks. And they had a Western chap who came on, I think he was American, and he got to this final round, and there were about 20 of these women left, and he picked this one girl, and the look of disgust on all the other women's faces, because he'd picked what in Asian culture is not considered to be an attractive woman. Far less attractive than any of them. But for Western beauty standards, she was the prettiest one, and that's where the largest one is. But a lot of these different traits and features do persist.
Yes, but what I was trying to get at was there are clearly these beauty standards that there's no getting away from it.
Mm-hmm.
But particularly on the male side, there seems to be the possibility, the ability to kind of completely break that standard. And I mean, I know now a lot of people will be saying, "Oh yeah, multi-millionaires and Bill Gates and astronauts and whatever." That's not really what I mean. I will give you one name, and hopefully you will know what I'm trying to get at. Gérard Depardieu.
I'm sorry, what? Did you cough?
Yes, he's French. But anybody who has seen him in films, particularly at the height of his powers, will kind of realize, well, hang on a moment. Here is a man who I don't think by any standard would ever have been considered good-looking, handsome.
Yeah.
But he just oozed charisma.
He cleaned up, did he?
He was one of these people who just, if he was on screen, he was the person you were looking at, even if he was third person on the back, slightly to the left, a bit obscured by the fern, if you know what I mean. It was bizarre, and you do find that with some men.
Well, I tend to find that men...
There appears to be this magical ingredient that somehow makes them just irresistible to the opposite sex. And it does seem to be charisma-based. It's personality-based. So these people do not have to be successful multimillionaire types, if you know what I mean. So it's not that they've got the status to make up for the lack of beauty.
Well, I think it's men have more avenues through which to become attractive, and it's also a case that, according to at least the literature that I've read, that the general rule of thumb is that the woman must look up, there must be something about the man which the woman feels that either she lacks or she's impressed by in the man. So this is why a woman could date a dirt poor musician who's got no wealth, because she's impressed and attracted to his skill on a particular instrument or his singing voice and
his
so on.
Artistry.
Yes, and again that's the case with a lot of different artistic types. But also
very much so.
Also, it can be
they're muses, aren't they?
But it can also be the vision that you have, like the plan that you have set out. It can also be, you get women who will be with men because they feel they will succeed.
Just, how they do these films, sort of Sharknado and whatever.
Yeah.
And just when you were talking about the vision, the vision that they have might make them attractive. It just couldn't help in my mind. Just this thought popped up in Adolf Hitler, babe magnet.
Well, you say that. Weirdly enough, I was reading about Oswald Mosley today because I was curious, along with a friend of mine, about whether or not he was actually considered attractive of his day. There's some really funny facts about him. And so he married this. I can't remember if she was a countess or not, but he married her young, and he was with her until he started cheating on her with his second wife, who outlived him. And his second wife is gorgeous, by the way, but shame about the kind of fascistic tendencies. But he was estranged from his first wife because she disagreed with his fascist thing, and she died of peritonitis, or at least that's what the records claim. And he later had an affair with both her sister and her stepmother as it went on, and he was a kind of...
Well, at least he kept it in the family.
And he was one of these... Oh, it's just a really bad phrase. But he did seem to have this kind of the magnetism and charm about him in that way, despite clear clear
But
evil.
it does seem to be something that exists. That somehow there does appear to be. I mean, I've noticed it sometimes with authors who just have these kind of larger than life personalities, and they just kind of sit there and they don't even need to say much, and they just somehow fill the room, if you know what I mean.
Yes.
You do get these sort of personas, and they do seem to be magnetic. I think the male is affected insofar that, I think we all psychologically know we're good at gauging the pecking order. And somehow we know with those types that even though they're not big and butch, even though they're not, multimillionaires or CEOs of massive companies, we somehow immediately realize, okay, yeah, he is someone who's quite high on the pecking order. And yes, the female of the species just seems to, faint at the side of these characters.
I have to say, it's very noticeable.
Have you Googled Gérard Depardieu yet?
Not really, because I didn't really hear his name before, and I just assumed French toff, But the
oh no, actually, he's quite the opposite from the toff. That's just it.
Fine, French twat. Then that's fine.
It's just he's Français, so therefore, how possibly could he be?
But no, just walking around in a striped shirt with a beret on and a baguette in hand.
Is pretty much the quintessential example. I think he is pretty much the best example. The kind of comes to mind of the person who isn't somehow gloriously good-looking, who was on screen, but nonetheless was a big star in his own right. And yes, the only way you could explain it was, yes, okay, he was a good actor, but he had that persona.
Yes, it's definitely a case that charisma, persona, a way of speaking... When it comes down to things, I've been thinking about recently to what degree a lot of this is predicated on something as simple as the modulating the tone of voice, and also what your God-given gift of the particular timbre of your voice as well.
Yes, but that's what actors are very, very good at. I mean, Sean Bean, I think, is pretty much capable of melting icebergs just with the voice, as far as the ladies are concerned. Which is why they use him in so many advertisements and voiceovers.
Obviously, I was thinking of it because in terms of YouTube almost, because I was curious about what makes people successful on YouTube. Not my channel.
Springs to mind.
My channel unrelated, but yes, it is. And you wonder to what degree that just plays a role, that you can sound far more magnanimous than you actually are, and this lends itself. But it's also to do with the way you speak. Again, very noticeable when I was in the military, that you would have a lot of prospective officer candidates, and they come in, and the way that they speak, and you just go right. But it doesn't even matter if you're highly, you're from the sort of, let's call it the upper class. It doesn't matter if you're from the the working class, although obviously the majority of us were middle, but the way in which you spoke, the confidence with which you spoke, and the kind of language that you could bring to bear with a particular tone of voice made a big difference.
Men, I would like you all to pick up your shooty bang bang things and walk off in that direction.
Thanks, Britisher. I'm never going to... That's going to scar me for the rest of my life. Yes.
Yes, I think that was an example of, in a way, what not to do, wasn't it?
Yeah, well, one would hope, yeah.
Yes. It would more than likely not have the required effect.
Aside from the specifics of what that actually entails, in terms of what kind of voices and personalities and whatnot all go into things, because it's not just a univariate thing. It's you look at... It was very noticeable, and it was not something that you could really quantify. It was just what we called the officer's bearing, and it basically was something that you either came in with, that you had from the start, or it was something that you tried to develop over the time in training and so on and so forth. and over the course of your career. And it was very clear the people who did manage it and the people who didn't. And the people who were, let's call it, the sort of, I reckon there were probably 2 people that I knew out of the 30 in my flight who you just knew instantly that not only were they, very capable people, and that obviously played to their strengths, but the way in which they presented themselves and they came across as trustworthy, and also they had something about them that you knew that they were going to go far.
I know what you mean. I think, yes, that there needs to be something about the person, but I think to a certain extent it's also down to practice. What I mean by that is, if you think of it, for most of the time of the British Army, it was really run by toffs.
Yes.
And
it's a horrible
the reason they could do it, at least to some degree, I mean, we are all aware of the horrible failures of some of them, but the reason that really worked across entire Europe with armies was because they were used to giving orders simply because they were the toffs. Do you understand what I mean? So they had effectively been brought up in a lifelong training of telling other people what to do.
There was also, it's also a case when you're talking about that it was very easy, because you bought your commission back in those days. It was very easy to be then pawned off somewhere, especially with such a large military and particularly naval force. It was very easy to be pawned off somewhere, and it was actually a great fear of commanding vessels, because I can't remember who it was who said that the British make a habit of shooting an admiral every so often because it keeps the others all in line. And really there was a lot of costs involved with if you actually managed to rise your way up through the ranks.
Well, it must be pointed out that the Navy was really the exception. That the army, particularly the cavalry, that was the poshest place you could be. Mm-hmm. That's where the commissions cost most.
Absolutely.
But when it came to the Navy, connections could get you places, but they couldn't make you an officer.
Interesting.
So you couldn't buy your commission in the Navy.
That's very good to know. I didn't know
that. It was understood that basically, if the captain got shot, and the first lieutenant had his leg blown off, and you were the second lieutenant, and your ship was somewhere in the Pacific, you would need to be able to get the vessel home.
Mm-hmm.
And if your only qualification was that you were
the daddy paid for it, yes,
precisely, daddy had bought you the commission, there was nothing to say that you could get this extremely expensive vessel with all these people aboard back home again.
And of course, we're not just talking expensive in terms of money invested. They were very expensive and time-consuming to make. So yes, absolutely.
So it was therefore understood that you needed to be qualified. So you joined the Navy as a midshipman, no matter who you were. And you needed to pass the exam to lieutenant.
Mm.
Thereafter, obviously favours could be done. So
but until that point,
posh family, then obviously admirals and whatever could help you on your way. And there were some famous examples of people who rose very quickly, and some other people who were kind of panned off to sort of, scoot about the Mediterranean in a sloop with no chance of ever getting anywhere. But it basically, the absolute pre-requirement, the prerequisite was you had to be qualified to actually do it.
Yeah.
And therefore, unlike in the army, where, okay, you are the third son of the Duke of Lancaster or whatever, we will just basically give you a commission and, let you bawl at soldiers. With the Navy, it was understood that you had to be able to navigate, and you needed to know which rope was which on the ship.
Very useful.
Otherwise, how could you be giving commands?
Yes, I would agree. I just know full well that some of my previous colleagues from the first service the father service would be rolling now in how dare he assume that we were like those pricks in the army, that sort of thing.
Well, yes, I mean, obviously, eventually everything became a specialist field. But yes, in the days of Napoleon and whatever, you did have the likes of Horatio Nelson joining the Navy and being seasick, which of course the writer of Hornblower then nicked. But yeah, he basically came from the bottom up because you had to come that way. There was no way that you could not be a midshipman.
Yeah.
And end up an admiral.
I imagine that made an awful lot of. It's probably one of the reasons why the British Navy was so successful, actually, because
it was why it was successful. It was also because they shot an admiral. Yes,
every so often.
Well, I know only of one admiral shot, but the other thing was that it also made the leaders beloved. You have to understand that these therefore weren't grandees that just came in from somewhere.
Yeah.
That a great many of various ships' companies will have experienced these men as boys and as officers and slowly getting somewhere, if you know what I mean. And that one therefore knew that the commanders were actually a sort of one of them, if you know what I mean. So, okay, yes, obviously they were the gentlemen. Obviously they had entered the ship with the career in mind. But one kind of understood that they had been once boys sitting on deck trying to learn how to tie knots.
Yes. The admiral that I was thinking of, which I'm sure you're familiar with as well, is a chap called John Byng.
Yes.
He basically, it's tragic, actually, because he was a capable officer. He basically went to Majorca during the 7 Years' War to try and relieve a besieged British garrison, and he engaged the French. But his ship was, or his fleet, I should say, was actually in very poor condition. It had been, I can't remember what particular reason it was. I think it might have been bad weather. But they were basically ruined by the time that they arrived, and there was some sort of disease going around the ships. So they were all ill, under-equipped, and poorly done. And it was inconclusive. They didn't drive the French off, but they didn't manage to. They didn't lose particularly many vessels either.
Yes, so if I remember rightly, he was found guilty of not doing his utmost.
Yes, exactly. He decided that he would do a tactical retreat to Gibraltar for repairs before he went back. But and unfortunately, he was recalled once they found out he had gone to Gibraltar. And when he returned to Britain, he was court-martialed, found guilty of failing to do his utmost to prevent Majorca falling to the French, and was sentenced to death by firing squad, which he was.
Well, I mean, you have to understand that to a certain extent there was an element of fairness within the unfairness. So, as harsh as it would seem to do that, because, if one looks into it, it could be argued that he was, that he was more than likely the recipient of rather rough justice.
Mm-hmm.
If it would be the third gunner from the left on a first-class ship of the line, would anybody really have cared? Do you understand what I mean? And it wasn't as if these people weren't quite at ease with having others flogged or hanged. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes.
So, for it to actually be dished out to one of the commanders
kind of set a precedent, didn't it?
It was quite an example to the rest of the officer class. But it also told the ordinary crewmen that, look, we will treat the commanding officers with the same level of harshness that we treat you. Do you understand what I mean?
Yes, we're all on the same boat here, as it
Precisely. Quite literally, yes. But when it came to it, of course, it's believed that the execution of Admiral Byng was what led to the kind of nigh on suicidal courage.
Oh yes, it led to
that was being shown by the British Navy in the Napoleonic War.
The rest of the the rest of the turn of the century, really, the rest of the time, the British waged an aggressive kind of every campaign was the most aggressive, all trying to outdo each other. So to say, they did their utmost. In fact, the quote I found from a chap called Nicholas Roger says, "A culture of aggressive determination which set British officers apart from their foreign contemporaries, and which in time gave them a steadily mounting psychological ascendancy. More and more in the course of the century and for long afterwards, British officers encountered opponents who then expected to be attacked, but more than half expected to be beaten, so that the latter went into action with an invisible disadvantage which no amount of personal courage or numerical strength could entirely make up for."
It was the equivalent of the New Zealand All Blacks. Yes.
I see. So Voltaire satirized his execution, which is where I was thinking of the original quote. So in Portsmouth, candid witnesses the execution of an officer by firing squad and is told that in this country it is good to kill an admiral from time to time to encourage the others. That was the line.
Well, but as I say, there was a certain truth to that. So, whether one, I very much believe one never had that in mind at the time. It was more than likely some, petty bureaucratic nightmare. But the end result of it was somehow to create a war machine that was unstoppable.
And it didn't.
Because, when you hear some of the things, and particularly when you read some of these novels by, C.S. Forester and Dudley Pope, and it's remarkable how many of them are actually based on true events, that the author has actually seen something that particularly inspired him and decided, you know what, I think I'll incorporate this in a book. I remember one particular one, C.S. Forester is the most famous one with Hornblower, but Dudley Pope did a series of books where the captain is called Ramage, and there is one particular episode that has always stuck in my mind where there was this island in the Caribbean, which is pretty much a kind of vertical cliff that comes out of the sea, if you know what I mean. And he realized that if he could get this other ship, which he knew was going to be due, and which was bigger than his, if he could somehow trap this thing, if he could lure it in, he might stand a chance if he got one of his ship's guns on top of that cliff.
Right.
Because the gun, the shot would then not just be coming sideways at the ship that would be attacking his, it would be plummeting. And if you think of those ships back then, the bulwarks, they faced outwards.
Yeah.
So if basically a horizontal shot got fired at them, that's what they were designed to withstand. If you basically had
if you dropped something on them,
plummet from a great height onto your deck, there was nothing really to stop it just going right through. Which is, of course, what it started doing once they found their range from the cliff.
Yeah.
So the idea was, we will put our own boat out there as the bait. The bigger ship will come in.
And we'll wreck it.
We will wait until we think it's comfortably within range. We won't shoot once it comes into range, because otherwise it can start turning away again.
Yeah.
But once it is kind of within range that even if it turns round, it will for a while still be, trying to tack against the wind or whatever, and we will have ample time to shoot at it. And yes, he won the duel by that manner. But getting a ship's gun onto the top of that island was some doing. But of course, with them being these incredibly sort of self-sufficient types, they were able to, rig up various A-frames on the top of the island and then hoist this thing up.
Mm.
Yes, it was. I think it was one of those moments where it's mentioned in dispatches, and he was particularly commended for his ingenuity, but always considering that he kind of presented himself as the bait for the other ship.
Yes, some bravery in that as well. Yes.
So yeah, it's a remarkable it's a remarkable thing. I think the only people I have ever heard of who displayed the same sort of reckless bravery than the Royal Navy were the Buccaneers.
Mm.
The 17th century types, the Henry Morgans and whatever. That's when you hear of some impossible feats. I believe there was a Pierre le Grand, so once again we're in French territory, who attacked an entire Spanish galleon in a tiny little sloop. And they attacked at night, and they managed to take the whole ship. So this guy sailed home in a treasure galleon. And yes, it was a ridiculous attack, but it was one of those in we will either succeed or we will all die doing.
Yes.
Yeah, I just the reputation that the Buccaneers gained in the Caribbean was similar to what you described before. That once the enemy encountered them, they already had defeat in mind, because they knew of the reputation of these fearsome fighters they were meeting.
There was a very similar vibe when it came to Napoleon, I believe.
Oh, yes.
With an awful lot of his battles, because he was so known. Although Napoleon was funny because he studied, basically. He would always study up on his enemy beforehand. It's one of the things that set him apart. He knew all of their tactics before they used them. Most nations would buy the book. So he would just design a counter thing. He maintained at the end of his career that he didn't know anything at the end of it that he didn't know at the beginning.
Yes, he was very modest.
Yes, a very modest man.
Napoleon. I believe for a while, the I don't know which one of the coalitions it was. I mean, there was something like 10 coalitions against him, wasn't there, over time?
Yeah.
But one of the coalitions resolved to use what one can only call sort of, Fabian tactics, as in, we won't fight Napoleon. So if they came across an army that was led by some French general, they would take them on. The moment they knew, it's commanded by Napoleon, well, we will back away. We will shadow the army, but we will not offer battle.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how frustrating it must have been for the most talented general in the world to constantly be chasing these armies around that never want to fight him.
Yes. Yeah. So all it took was to lead him up to the wastes in Russia. They then froze him to death. That was that. In fact, Napoleon, it was amazing when he got his army and decided he was going to go over after the Russians. He accumulated people who, just by knowing that it was him going, joined his army. And so you can see there's a great infographic of the size of his army as it increases towards Russia. And then you see what happens when the winter sets in and how dramatically it drops. And it's a huge...
there is nothing like... there's nothing like a winner. And... I think, similar things must have happened to people like, Alexander the Great, that his cortege must have just got bigger and bigger and bigger as he went on.
Well, Alexander the Great was unique in that he never really had a plan, as it were. He just wanted to own everything that he saw in sight, right? Yes. But he never wanted to be off the campaign. And in fact, that's why he died, probably of malaria, whilst he was on the campaign. Because he basically just headed east and never stopped. And if you look at his empire, it is a great line where he went and as he goes across the land. And he used to... So his general rule of thumb was he would conquer somewhere and he'd leave one of his soldiers or a group of soldiers there to continue to hold it. But he despised them because they had left him.
Yes, yeah.
And
I think all of them, including Alexander, are supposed to have believed in luck.
Oh, really?
As a quantifiable thing. Caesar commented on luck. Napoleon commented on luck. So somehow the great generals, I think they all realise that, look, we're playing dice. But we can play with loaded dice. But, you know, in a way, there may well be situations where you just can't win.
Yeah.
You know, but if you basically know how to tilt the odds in your favour,
Yes,
and I think in that regard, that's why Alexander is sort of seen as the ultimate, because he's the gambler that just never loses.
Yeah.
You know, he is really the chap who goes to Las Vegas and breaks the casino.
There's of all things, there is an episode of The Fresh Prince of Bel-Air where Will Smith takes Carlton and they go to Las Vegas, and Carlton has this book which has all the strategies for roulette and that sort of thing. And Will Smith,
I can see where this is going.
And Will Smith is just going like, let it ride and keep going, and he keeps winning. And Carlton is screaming at him after about 10 minutes, where he's just going, you can't possibly win! The odds of you winning are less than 1%! You cannot possibly do this! You can't swing it! And he just rolls 7 at craps, or whatever it is that he's playing at the time. Rolls a 7 and wins like some stupid amount of money again. And he just throws the book out the window, I think, or something to that effect. Because he's just gambling, yeah.
When it comes to luck, I think Caesar said something like, you cannot control luck, but you can make the most of it, or you can account for it. So basically, always keep something in reserve because your enemy might still get lucky.
Yeah.
And at the same time, if some luck comes your way, so imagine sort of you're in the Wimbledon final, it's match point, and the other guy hits back a return that's completely unreturnable, but it hits the net cord and then goes up almost vertically, so you've just got an easy smash, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
If something like that happens, it's for you to be there and smash that thing, if you know what I mean.
It seems like...
On the other hand, Napoleon famously said, don't give me good generals, give me lucky ones. So he also seemed to be aware of the fact that Lady Luck plays a part in this.
It seems to me, what is it? This in more modern times, there's this thing where there's this idea that if you get 1,000 applicants for a job, right, you shuffle the papers and then you throw 500 of them in the bin because you don't want to hire unlucky people. But I
like that. Yes.
But it seems to be like an early foreshadowing of if you're appreciative that luck is fickle, right, which I'm sure a number of these people are, and certainly this idea of you keep something in reserve in case the opposing general gets lucky or whatever, the wind changes and so on.
Yeah,
you just think, well, this is just really early critical thinking, as it were, when it comes to the idea of not putting all your eggs in one basket, and then also an attitude of take every single opportunity that's presented to you, no matter how small, because you don't know how it will turn out. Because
basically the unforeseeable can happen.
Yes,
something can happen that is neither in your opponent's plan nor in yours. So suddenly a thunderstorm starts off, or something like that. Those sorts of things can occur. And then, yes, if you're fully committed, you may just be smashed to pieces by that. And yeah, there seem to be, but from what I understand, it's kind of quite a lot of the great commanders seemed to understand luck as some sort of, how should we say, sort of strangely elastic quantity, as if it is something that actually materially exists. Do you understand what I mean? A bit like the luck virus in Red Dwarf.
Oh, you're speaking my language now. Yeah.
But there is something there that fortune really does exist, that it isn't just completely random.
But there's also that phrase, isn't there? Fortune favours the bold.
Favours the bold, yes.
Yes.
But yeah, it's sort of interesting. It's an interesting thought to think that in a way, no matter how arrogant the likes of Napoleon were, that they still had the humility to actually think, well, yes, but to a certain extent, I'm also just lucky.
Well, is it also necessarily, you have to remember in certain times, luck and the goddess or god of luck probably were on the mind there as well, where you go, yes, it's quantifiable because we know who represents it and who we pray to each night.
But I mean, it's
not
it
that
really
I think
it is an interesting one that these people kind of were gamblers, and at times they were willing to put their own life on the line. So, what was he called? It wasn't the Little Corporal, wasn't it? That Napoleon actually stormed that bridge in northern Italy when he was leading his men. What did they call him? The Little
Corporal.
He got that nickname.
I mean, that is Napoleon's
by the French army.
It is Napoleon's nickname, but I'm trying to remember.
It was when he basically, holding the French flag, charged across the bridge, leading his men.
So
So he was willing to put his own life on the line, and Caesar at a famous battle when it was really hanging in the balance, and he felt that his troops were wavering. Basically, pushed himself into the front line.
Yeah, the death zone,
and basically was there, basically roaring at the top of his voice. Will you see your own commander die here?
Yes,
and you can sort of see they understood that sort of hard to quantify thing, the psychology of it. I mean, Caesar famously wore a bright red cape. I mean, it's believed that all of them wore red capes, the officers and whatever, but Caesar's was really just startlingly red. So more than likely it was re-dyed again and again and again, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So much so that you could just instantly spot him on the battlefield. In the same way that Napoleon had that hat.
Yes.
To make it absolutely clear, Napoleon is here. I am here with my men. And it was one of the famous battles with the Helvetians, where Caesar, when they came under attack, as a great gesture, got off his horse and told, someone to take it away.
Yeah.
So basically, I'm here, I'm on foot, I'm with you lot. If you die, I die.
Yeah. It's fascinating
because it's a psychological game, isn't it?
It's very fascinating because you look at this over time, because you do a little bit of study of military history when you're in the forces. Also, the petit corporal thing was because at the Battle of Lodi, he took over the sighting of one of the cannons himself, which was a job usually done by a corporal. Mm. But you look at it, and especially because armies back in the day, you think bright colours. You need to know who your friends are, basically, and you want to put a show on, effectively, for the enemy. You want to scare them a bit. And it's amazing how the transition, particularly across the Great War, World War One, really changed the game on that, shall we say, because you were very easy to hit if you were wearing bright colours.
Well, I think already India, the British, started moving to khaki, didn't they?
But you look at it, and you look at commanders nowadays. So in theatre, if you're an officer, for instance, you take off your tabs, especially if you're in a forward operating base, and so does everyone else. It's not just the officer class. But you take them off because as soon as you're identified, there are very long range, very accurate people who can take you out.
It's not entirely new.
No.
Already in the day of Nelson's fleet, the officers would actually, the captains and whatever, would be advised to take off their epaulets and everything. And of course, Nelson famously didn't do so. So he was this shining star in the middle of the battle.
With all his eggy spread, yeah.
You can imagine he must have been gleaming like a diamond with all these medals and everything.
There's also the arm, his favourite arm.
Gunned down. So already then, the sort of officers basically try to not necessarily disguise themselves, but look a little less conspicuous. So it was already beginning then. I think pretty much with the arrival of rifle fire,
Yes,
when
quite right.
somebody would be able to pick out whom exactly it was they wanted to shoot.
Yes, because people don't seem to realise quite how inaccurate firearms used to be. So, for instance, you remember dueling pistols and that sort of thing.
Yes.
Right, so simple. And the reason that people would challenge each other to duels, because you only got one shot, and the likelihood of you hitting someone was actually remarkably low. In fact, if you did actually kill someone, you could then be taken to court about the murdering someone. It wasn't kind of like a gentleman's, well, he agreed to it. It was just basically something which people did for bravado. But there's also a reason why when the British, especially the redcoats, so we say, when they went to war, they had these effectively phalanxes and firing lines, and, this line fires and this line reloads, and then the next line fires as the other ones drop to their knees and so on and so forth. And that was because you could get a guarantee that you could effectively obliterate a large area, but it was not accurate.
It was just a wall of bullets, really.
This is before the development of rifling, and it's obviously there's a lot of smoke around as well, because you're talking about sort of pre-smokeless gunpowder and all sorts, and you have to put the bullets in manually, so it's all depends on how well you've wedged that in there and how much you've used in terms of wadding and so on and so forth. So it's it was a very inaccurate game, which is why it was, again, still numbers. Whereas now,
I've got to ask you. I think I know what the answer is going to be.
Oh, go on.
I've got to ask you: have you ever seen the film Scaramouche with Stuart Granger?
No, I am aware of its existence, though. I'm afraid.
Because it basically sort of harks back to those days when people would duel. And what is effectively suggested in the film is that it's a kind of game of sort of the parliamentarians, whereby one side has this extremely good dueling fencer, and he just basically makes sure to insult as many as possible of the opposite political side, and thereby is then capable of taking them out.
I see.
So he just so happens to have wronged somebody else who, it had nothing to do with politics, but this man wants revenge. And goes out of his way to study fencing with the greatest fencing instructors you possibly can, in order to then eventually join the opposing political party and take on this chap. So you then got these dueling champions go at each other, and it's a sort of a beautiful little concept of sort of political assassination at a time when, just smacking someone in the face with a pair of gloves was enough to get it done, if you know what I mean.
Amazing. Do you feel like we've done enough empire shagging, as it were, this evening yet, Britisher?
Well, I don't know. I think perhaps you might need to explain that particular expression, because there might be some people who are not followers of ours on Twitter who wouldn't therefore know what it is you were referring to.
I believe you were retweeted by someone, weren't you, Britisher?
Yes.
Who accused you of being basically some prick who is guilty of constantly empire shagging without recognising any of the negatives, shall we say, of British imperial rule.
Person who, shall we say, is of a slight leftist disposition, and therefore took umbrage largely just at the existence of my avatar.
Of course, I think your avatar should change immediately, by the way, to a how shall I put this delicately? You can keep the helmet, right? You can keep the monocle, but you need to be wearing your gym attire, sort of white shirt and shorts that you were wearing when you...
bandage around my head.
Yes, and a bandage around the head to keep the pith helmet on.
Yeah, I thought for a moment you were about to suggest that I should go from the imperial attire with the pith helmet to instead, a sort of wild, straggly, but not too full a beard, wild hair, and then a beret, the full sort of Che effect.
Chez Britishara.
Chez Britishara, yes. I'm sure that would be the sort of avatar that would fit with the person who had a problem with me.
Yes,
that would placate that particular complainant.
You would placate one and alienate everyone else. I do just want to catch us up with a little bit of the super chats though, because obviously we've got a little bit behind on those. Margoot says, Britisher, with your claim on green and pleasant land, you should do a recitation of William Blake's Jerusalem. Thoughts?
Well, I mean, who knows? I mean, I've done all sorts of silly stuff. Are
you calling William Blake silly, British?
Well, no, I would say it's more the idea of my reciting it that would be silly. But yeah, I have done the odd poem or two, haven't I?
Right, that's it. So I'll do it. I'm sure my subscribers would love that. It would be good. DRT is King says, Free Hong Kong. If we nuke Iran, will we get Iranian anime? Iranime, as it were.
Iranime, yes. I mean, who knows? It's one thought.
You have to nuke them twice in order to get that.
That is that. And there has to be one unfortunate who gets nuked once and then decides to go and recuperate at the other place that you nuke then.
Oh, goodness me.
You do know there was a chap who got nuked twice.
I do feel like it's probably better that he died that way than being exposed to so much radiation that he developed tumours and cancers.
In fact, I don't think he died at all.
Did he not die in the second one?
No, he survived.
Goodness me. Just well, we know what the missing link was then. We know what they were using for the targeting.
The question that has always been on everyone's mind ever since is he the unluckiest or the luckiest man in the world?
It's both, really, isn't it? Oh dear. Well, we'll have to consult Aristotle, obviously, who taught Alexander the Great all about luck, clearly.
No doubt, yes.
You following that?
I can well imagine that particularly the ancients, I think, particularly in the days when, the world wasn't quite as scientific, and however scientifically minded and philosophically minded Aristotle will have been, I can't help but suspect that the contemporaries of that age will have believed in something like luck.
The chat is saying that the chap who survived both nukes lived till his mid-90s and had a very good hat.
Well, so there you go.
So there we are.
Was the hat for you?
The hat was to hide his crippling disfigurement and all the mutations, clearly, which were going on underneath there. Of course, this does bring us to the question of Iran, shall we say? How do you feel? I saw that you did a segment on Soleimani in the week that was, but what do you make of the whole Iranian situation at the moment?
Well, I mean, the first thing to say, because I had people on Twitter, this is World War III.
Yes, there's been a lot of World War III.
No, I mean, for one, have you heard any belligerence from Russia? As in, don't touch Iran, don't even think of it.
No.
You know what I mean?
Yes. So their support base is, shall we call it, slim?
Yes, the Russians are basically looking at this going, okay, so we've got the option of basically dropping Iran like a hot potato, or full-on thermonuclear war if the Americans decide to attack.
Mm-hmm.
Is Iran worth this? And I think the clear Russian calculation will be not on your Nelly. As in, you've got yourself into this mess. We're not going to be the allies that just stand by you while you have actually got proxies firing at the Americans.
We know that
this won't happen.
We know that for the sake of themselves, the Iranian government has to be seen to do something. At the moment, the big thing that they did that I saw recently, aside from chanting "Death to America" in their parliament, which again I feel like is more of an appeal for "Please don't kill us" to the I can't remember the name of the king over there. the Ayatollah. But chat saying, do you watch Maya Tuzi? He's done really interesting videos on this. Yes, I definitely recommend a subscription to Maya Tuzi. He is supported by Turning Point UK, I think. But it is, it's not necessarily a negative. That's just being aware of where your information comes from. But he's really solid on this, and he's from an Iranian family. He actually got a message after he made his video about the situation, trying to clear things up, from the Iranian embassy, which says, "We're watching you."
Oh, that's always good to know. It indicates just what for a pleasant lot they are over there.
They really are. But
this is one of the things that I think a lot of people need to be very careful with. I have seen comments, I've had them in my comment section, I've had them on Twitter and whatever, as in sort of, I will never trust the USA, the CIA this, and in 1950 this, and in 1960 that, and you go, yes, no, nobody is saying the Americans are complete angels, but when it comes to whose side you would actually pick between these two sides,
yes.
If you are so wrapped up in either your conspiracy theories or your hatred of the Americans that you would actually side with the Iranians on this one, then perhaps you need to review your priorities.
The Iranians, as well, the thing that they're claiming at the moment is that Soleimani was there on a peace mission.
Oh yes, of course.
To de-escalate tensions with the Iraqis. You could say anything. I don't believe it for a second, to be perfectly honest, but I have nothing to back that up.
I have problems believing either version. So I have problems believing that that Soleimani was over there in order to bring peace to a troubled region. But at the same time, I have also got my problems with, we knew that he had an elaborate plan in order to strike out at American targets in the Green Zone in Baghdad.
I definitely think it was entirely a case of he had been pissing off Donald Trump. He wanted to make an example to the Iranians after the embassy attack. And he just was the guy who fell into the mold of the chap who they wanted to make an example of, and they would find any excuse.
They will have got intelligence, as in Soleimani is here.
Yeah.
And for one, I think there will have been some people that will have been putting, two and two together, as in, hang on a moment, this has just turned into a complete powder keg, and look who's in town. Yeah. I think that will have sprung to mind. But at the same time, also, so we've got an absolute top target, and this is what is so bizarre, as in, the Allies were never consulted. And, you see, we should, anybody who is killed by the Americans should first be tried. And you just go, yes, but he's there now.
I also...
They've got him in the crosshairs now. They won't have him in the crosshairs in half an hour's time.
I think when it comes to these sorts of things as well, one of the things, because people keep talking about, this will be a conventional war and so on and so forth. Well, if because Iran, obviously, one of the big deals with Iran is the whole nuclear thing, right? Whether or not they have developed nuclear weapons, whether or not they should have nukes, access to nuclear anyway. And they basically, the Iranians cannot declare war on America. I think they've talked to the Chinese. I think they've already talked to the Russians, who are tacit allies, shall we call it that. And they are not willing to back them. In the same way, I think they were hoping, potentially, if they showed a strong enough front, that the Russians would be willing to back them in the same way that the Russians backed Assad. But I don't think Russia is willing to have another Syria situation on its hands anyway.
Well, but particularly not in direct conflict with the United States of America.
Indeed. And it would be a much more direct conflict. At the same time, I think Iranians know it's suicide, but Donald Trump is also proving with this particular move, if nothing else, rightly or wrongly, that he is unpredictable when it comes to these things. There is just enough...
He is he is deliberately playing sort of Wild Bill Hickok,
in
you don't know what the next thing is he's going to do.
Under the worst possible idea, which is that Trump really didn't know masses about this guy, but he was pissing him off on Twitter, and he didn't like him, so he got rid of him. Okay, I don't think that's the case, but that's what like the hardcore leftists are saying. Aside from anything else, that he just basically didn't like a guy on Twitter, and that's why he took him out. Even under that, do you think that guy, that man, under that kind of, with that kind of impulsivity and lethality at his disposal, wouldn't push the button on the nuclear option? That's
Well, you see, I think the questions have to be not about the USA. They have to be about Iran. As in, the USA is the world hegemon. They are the sort of hyperpower, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
In a strange way, it's kind of occurred to me while I've been thinking about this stuff that in a strange way, the USA almost involuntarily is slowly turning into an empire. But that's more than likely, a subject for another day, because it would more than likely take quite a while to explain.
Mm-hmm.
But when it comes to this situation, look at what the Iranians have been up to. So there was, how on the BBC, on the news channel, they have this Dateline London, where they have various correspondents, a German correspondent, an Arab correspondent, an American,
British.
French.
I don't want to know about what sexual services that you call, Dateline London.
Well, but they then kind of approach this from the perspectives of their various countries and so on.
Okay. Yeah.
And of course, with the American correspondent, it was bleedingly obvious. I'm not sure whether he was New York Times, but it was Orange Man bad.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what Trump does, Orange Man bad. But even he had to concede that he had actually been speaking to some people in Washington in the run-up to this. And these were people who are more associated with the Democrat, who were basically saying that the series of attack and the irrational behavior, well, not irrational, erratic behavior of Iran, that at some point the United States of America would have to react. The idea that they just fire missiles at your bases and you don't do anything.
Yeah.
At some point, you need to react. So what they did is they bombed some of, Kataib Hezbollah's bases. They took out 5 of them. And as a reaction to that, they then attacked the embassy. And, I mean, when you think of the embassy, the attack on the embassy, you have to consider it cost Jimmy Carter his presidency.
Mm-hmm.
So they stormed the embassy, they took all the people who worked there hostage. The Americans tried to free them, and it was an unsuccessful attempt. The whole thing fell apart. Jimmy Carter ended up looking very, very weak.
Yeah.
Now, you can say maybe it was already Ronald Reagan's time and he would have won anyway. But it was a major thing in that particular election. The fact that the Americans basically lost an embassy, that unlike in Benghazi where people were killed, these people were actually taken hostage and then used as bargaining chips with the United States of America.
Yeah.
That is not the situation the world hegemon wants to find itself in, where it has to deal with one of these kind of, crummy little countries that are kind of, have a vicious hatred towards them and have to start exchanging some of the terrorists and whatever in exchange for their own embassy workers.
Yeah.
Now, had they managed to succeed to get into that embassy, that's what would have happened. So they were firing missiles at American bases. They had done so, according to that particular journalist. And as I say, this was the Orange Man Bad journalist, that it had been something like 11 attacks or something like that. The latest one killed a contractor in one of the bases. And that's when the Americans decided, okay, enough's enough. We're launching airstrikes. So they launched airstrikes against the group believed to be behind it. Now, again, people have sort of said to me, oh, well, believed to be, said to be, yada, yada. Well, yeah, in that case, who is doing it? You understand what I mean?
Yeah.
So they launch airstrikes against these folks, and as a result, they get an attack on the embassy, which, very tellingly, the Iraqi authorities did absolutely nothing to stop. So, at that moment, as far as the American government is concerned, that's when you're in really hot water. That's when you go, oh, dear God, they're trying to get into our embassy. Now, if you don't do anything, what prevents them from coming back 24 hours later, but this time with bulldozers and bombs and whatever, in order to get their way into that embassy? So that's when you do need, and it is a ruthless game. People are sort of saying, oh, well, it's an assassination. And this, I would say this is in a way more a case of a sort of a restrained version of war, where they're kind of tit for tat. People are dying,
Yeah.
So that's when I sort of see it. They have to make an example. There are times, what was it? Not the Ethiopian expedition. There was a moment when the British went up into Ethiopia, but it was the Abyssinian expedition, when the British flexed their muscle in the late 1800s.
Okay.
Just to kind of, because I think some missionaries had been taken hostage or something like that. Now, this was outside of their domain, but it clearly was that these folks were being targeted because they were Christians and because they were British, and because the Abyssinian monarchy kind of felt that we are so inaccessible, we can do this. And the British then went out of their way to march an entire army up there with all the logistical problems and the huge cost of the whole thing.
Yeah.
Just to demonstrate we will not be bargained with in this way. We are the power.
Yeah.
And that is effectively what the Americans are doing here. And in that regard, I don't think it had anything to do with Trump being in charge. I think that pretty much any American president would have launched something major. And therefore, whether another American president would have taken out Soleimani, who knows? But something significant would have been done, because the moment one went at that embassy, particularly given the Iranian history with that embassy, one crossed a line. And that's when the Americans had to, in a way, show you cannot do this.
I suppose at this point, we're looking at effectively the everything seems to be going sort of in slow motion, right? An action has taken. The world is holding its breath and seeing what Iran will do. Now, I don't think Iran has the stones to make much more than they've already been doing, right? The next Soleimani will come up through the ranks, and things are there. But they might pause before doing anything dramatic in future, but we'll see.
But there's nothing to say that they couldn't give themselves 2 or 3 years before eventually they act.
So it's a kind of, as you say, a slow war, but I don't know enough about the attitudes and the Iranian the Iranian culture and that sort of thing to know what they would do next, or even make a prediction. I think I'd feel vastly underqualified doing so.
Well, I mean, when it comes to it, 2 of the sort of more obvious things have already happened. That they have further distanced themselves from the nuclear agreement, which is effectively dead anyway.
I mean, they were never on board with that. Yes.
Well, yes, but they were still adhering to it to a certain degree, and they still are now.
Well,
and for very good reasons. It's a kind of chess move.
But as far as we're aware, that they were doing, depending. But
well, yes, but the reason they are still, to some degree, adhering to it is because it drives a wedge between the Europeans and the Americans.
Mm.
The last thing the Iranians want is a completely united front of NATO.
Yes, and that is something which I forgot to mention. But
with
it's
the Europeans having sort of committed themselves to this treaty, with the Iranians kind of, to a certain degree, adhering to it and saying, oh, the bad Americans, Orange Man, he has withdrawn from this treaty, they have kind of split the Europeans from the Americans.
I feel like, yes, it's one of those things as well where it's known, even if Iran could muster, let's say, China and Russia to basically get behind them, although it's well known that the Chinese, the air and naval arm of the Chinese is quite weak comparatively anyway, and you're looking at a World War III situation there, it really would be the entirety of the European bloc who are also tied into this conflict, and it would be a war which would, even if nukes are not involved, be very, very damaging to everywhere. And let's face it, Iran's the place that gets wiped first. So,
well, put it like this: simply ask yourself, because when it comes to it, the Allies. This is one of the things that people are sort of always pointing to when they think, "Oh, Iran is terribly big. It's a huge place. You can't possibly hope to control it," and so on. That's all true. That is absolutely true. That's one of the considerations of the Allies. But when it comes to the considerations of the actual Iranian regime, their consideration is not, will our country still be able to fight on when we're all gone? Their consideration is, how do we hang on?
Yeah.
And if you go into a war and you are Iran and you're going up against Israel, the United States of America, and Saudi Arabia, that's without even any European involvement, then in that particular region, you are going to come off worse.
Yeah.
And there is no way that the Iranian government could hope to survive that. What, after all their death, then happens with Iran, and whether it is easily pacifiable and so on, is really irrelevant to them. They are keen to stay in power and continue their, theocratic reign. The only way they can do that is if they don't enter a full-scale war with the two regional powers and the world's hyperpower.
Yeah.
If they get into that vice, they can only lose.
Quite right. I think
and that's why I think that perhaps their tactic will rather be geared towards Iraq. So we've already seen, militias in Iraq and whatever. There has been noises of Muqtada al-Sadr threatening to raise forces and things like that. That is, I think, the sort of scenario that can hurt the Americans without actually having Iran directly in the firing line. And I think that's much more what the Iranians might be interested in. A sort of, cold yet distant revenge by just causing mayhem and possibly lots of deaths, but not having themselves in the firing line, because if they place themselves there, they lose by default.
Yeah. I think they know full well that as soon as they put their name to the paper, as it were, then there'll be that's it. I mean, there'll be that's the great big target on their face.
Well, I mean, how many stealth bombers has the United States of America got? The overall size of their air force. How many naval arms could the United States of America gather in the sort of northern Indian Ocean without necessarily going immediately into the Gulf?
Yes, it's a disproportionate.
You look at just the sheer amount of clout, and you realise, yes, they cannot possibly hope to win something like that. The only deterrent they have got is to try and do the attacker harm, but they can't possibly hope to win, and that's why if the Americans really get the bit between their teeth, the Iranians have to back down, simply because, war to them is not an option because they can't win it.
Yeah. I agree. Of course, I will end this particular conversation, etc. Though I think what you've said is quite salient, Britisher. With the phrase, "There's always luck," isn't there, Britisher?
There's always luck. Yes, there is. There is always luck. Something catastrophic could happen. That as the fleet is gathering in the northern Indian Ocean, a tsunami could suddenly, because that's what happened with the Mongol fleet, wasn't it? That's where the word kamikaze comes from. What's it called? Is it the divine wind?
Yes.
Which sunk the entire Mongol fleet and thereby saved Japan.
The people in chat are saying, Harry Channel says, "We tried to count our stealth bombers, but that proved to be quite unfeasible." And Mergoot is pointing out that, yes, we have three fleets, 4 carriers. It takes us a week to get there. Yeah. Whereas, yes, the Iranians do not have a carrier at all, so it's... Yes.
Well, I remember in one of the Week That Was episodes, I couldn't help but have a little fun with the Iranians' newly designed aircraft, which was kind of presented at some military show, as in, this is their latest piece of hardware.
Mm-hmm.
And you looked at it and you just went, I'm sorry, but that's a copy of the American Northrop F5, which was cutting edge how long ago?
You'd be surprised.
It wasn't even cutting edge in its day. It was kind of, a light fighter to be a bit of a stopgap where you didn't have any of the more expensive models, if you know what I mean.
You'd be surprised how much stuff, and especially how much military tech is not modern innovation.
But it was kind of remarkable to see them present this and kind of try and keep a straight face.
Yeah.
So yeah, I couldn't help but be amused, and I think at the time in that particular episode of The Week That Was, it kind of came across a bit. Mind you, I must admit that I have not for a long time enjoyed making an episode of The Week That Was as much as I did this last one.
What can you say? The threat of war burns through your veins.
I think people may have noticed that at times I was struggling to go on. That once or twice I cracked up, but there were other instances already when I really was struggling because I never expected this. So I was off, 2 or 3 weeks. But obviously, this being over Christmas, you don't really expect there to be any news.
No.
And yet, this was one of the most ludicrous sequences ever. The amount of complete nonsense news that there was
in the whole history of The Week That Was.
That you were really struggling to just basically to get through it without laughing. And yes, at one particular moment, yes, when it came to superhero films and transgender superheroes, I just couldn't anymore. It was too much for me. But yes, I must honestly say that was perhaps one of the most enjoyable ones I've ever done, just simply because the subject matter was so ludicrous and it just kept on coming, if you know what I mean.
Well, you know what you're going to go watch as soon as this particular stream is done, don't you, audience?
No, I honestly, I'm not trying to shill. I'm really... What I'm just trying to say, it is remarkable how much of this stuff happened over this period in which you would have thought nothing would be happening because everybody would be singing jingle bells and stuffing their face with Christmas cake.
Ding dong merrily on high, indeed.
Precisely, yes.
I will just move us on now then to the next super chat, which comes from Mogut, who says, as to voice timbre, and that's going back a little bit in the show, when we were talking about beauty and masculinity and handsomeness and so on and so forth. As to voice timbre, just read the rest of this. There's a ladies' channel on Pornhub that uses Sargon's videos as ASMR to fap to. Thank you for that, Magoot.
Well, there's a thought.
I'm not going down that thought. It's just like the politics of Starship Troopers. I think we'll.
So is this actually just his voice relayed, or is it somebody basically speaking his words, but in a come hither manner?
No, I presume that someone has just put his video on and is having a wank to it. Pretty sure that's a simple.
Oh, so I am basically expecting much too high a level of sophistication here. Am I?
From a porn site. No, yeah, surely. I think. Thanks for that. The Harry Channel has sent $10 through Streamlabs. Thank you very much. Just a quick reminder that if you decide to send a super chat through Streamlabs, I get to keep 90% of it instead of 70%. Very much helps me out. So that's appreciated, but I won't mention that again. The Harry Channel says, from the outsider's perspective, and we are talking now back to our imperial talk about luck and skill.
Yes.
He says, the difference between luck and skill is reproducibility. I teach this lesson to millennials and zoomers on the pool table as often as possible. At first they say, you're lucky. Later they say nothing.
Is he playing pool with planets, though?
I'm sure he'd take the opportunity if given, and he'd had a few bevies.
But when it comes to luck in battle and things like that, just ask yourself, how many battles have been won by a particularly sort of tactical trick or an ambush or something like that. Now, we all know these things cannot work. Mm-hmm. So, to a certain extent, with many of them, you need that bit of luck whereby, or should we say, this is one of the things that I really firmly do believe in, that success is largely, people always sort of say, it's hard work and it's diligence and it's this and it's that. I like to say that it's the absence of bad luck. Because bad luck can cripple anything. Doesn't matter how diligent you are, doesn't matter how hard you work at it, it doesn't matter, how much skill you apply and how good you are at it. If you are unlucky, it will do for you no matter what.
Well, it's not even if you're an unlucky person, but if you're unlucky in the wrong moment and you are talking to the quintessential
well, no,
case.
This is precisely it. If the government suddenly changes the rule and you have just got a up-and-coming business that is exploiting some niche, and suddenly it's just poof, it's all just disappeared. It has nothing to do with your ability. It's just gone.
You're talking to the man whose career ended because of a poorly placed rabbit hole on a mountain.
Well, there you go.
So it's yes.
It's just that. So you don't necessarily even need luck. You need the absence of bad luck.
As well.
And that's, when you
really,
listen to these sort of traps that these various generals and whatever set for each other in these grand battles and whatever, Napoleon hiding a part of his army in the mist and things like that. All you need is something going wrong, and the other side gets wind of it by pure luck. I mean, wasn't it in the Battle of Midway that the Japanese scouting planes, reconnaissance aircraft, didn't find the Americans, but the Americans found the Japanese. So one side knew where the other one was, but the other one didn't know where they were. And in a way, it just depended where the clouds were at the time. If you know what I mean, which way the wind was blowing. And that was completely beyond the control of either side.
Yes, and it's the thing with skill is your ability to adapt. So, so it's like if you get hit by a burst of bad luck or poor fortune or whatever, how well are you able to roll with the punches? So we are and pick yourself back up. And
can you save the situation? Can you kind of get yourself out of the muddle that Lady Fortune has got you into?
Indeed. Someone, chat's saying, is someone going to link that song on ASMR, or are you just going to ignore it? It's like, no one's going to link it to the porn site in the chat, I'm afraid. You'll have to go hunting for it yourself. But yes. Plebeian has donated Plebeian, I'm so sorry, donated and says, the reason for the British Army wearing scarlet is because during the Civil War, Parliament decided to use the cheapest dye at the time, Venetian red.
Yes.
And it was cheap.
That makes perfect sense, yes.
Mm.
Why would you take anything that is ridiculously expensive?
Yes.
Interesting.
Also...
When it comes to national colours, here's a thought for you. Racing colours. You ever heard of British racing green?
Yes, I do. I have.
But these various national colours tended to change over time. So we like to think of the Italians, Italia, Ferrari. We think of red, don't we?
Yes.
But back in the days of Bugatti, what was their colour? Blue.
Ah.
So the racing colours of the various countries tended to sort of switch a bit, switch around a bit over time. And it's kind of interesting to sort of see how, sometimes the French were blue, sometimes the Italians were blue, and so on. But yes, the Brits had sort of British racing green and kind of stuck to it. But yeah, it just came to mind when we were talking about uniforms that the racing colours and the sort of the national colours that you associate with certain sports, they seem to be sort of laced with all sorts of meaning. I mean, how come the Italians are playing in blue and so too are the French?
Yeah. It's fascinating. Whenever I think of British racing green, I've always got this memory. There was a green Jaguar that, obviously, before it was bought by the Germans, who now also associate with being green. But there was this green Jaguar that I saw when I was very young, and I cannot remember where I saw it, but I have emblazoned on my mind this striking angle on this British racing green Jaguar. And I remember thinking at the time that I didn't very much like British racing green, but on that car in particular, it did look fantastic.
It somehow worked, didn't it?
Yes.
Well, I think you can go back as far as those sort of old open-top Bentleys.
Mm-hmm.
That already then there was that sort of racing green, and somehow it stuck, and it's a peculiarly British kind of shade of green. That nobody else seems to. I mean, when the Irish play sports in green, it's a much sort of more brighter, sort of fluorescent thing, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas that sort of green that the Brits used for racing cars, for some reason, was this kind of sort of strangely understated affair of, we've just got a very fast car, we don't need a bright colour.
Fair enough. The chat is mentioning that the Italians tended to switch around a lot, and that they were known, and they are known, as the Azure, which of course is
Azzurri.
Azzurri even. So it is a blue, a relation to blue. And I also point out that
what is it in Italy? It's Forza Azzurri, and it's in France. It's Allez les Bleus.
Ah, I see. The people now saying Jaguar is Ford now, or owned by the by Tata Motors by proxy, which is Indian company. And I always, Ferrari is Fiat now. So.
Oh yes, I think they've been Fiat though for donkey's years. I think they already in the 70s or whatever. I think they were Fiat. So I think they've always been a sort of a stable of Fiat, but they've always been sort of fiercely independent.
And now Up Yours is telling us that no, the British racing green comes because tea is green.
That's debatable, isn't it?
It depends on the variety of your tea. But yes, it's amazing actually what countries have used which colours to represent themselves, not just now but historically, but also what that colour choice was based on. So if you take something like the Romans and purple, for instance, and how it was a very difficult colour to create, and so it was richly expensive.
Snail shell, yes.
And similarly, where you had things like where blue was used, and it was due to the prevalence of lapis lazuli and or various crushed minerals which can produce that particular shade. It's very difficult to do, and you just wonder to what degree how many decisions have been influenced and how many colours you associate with different things are purely due to cost-effective solutions, or because it is costly.
I'm absolutely certain that will have always been one of the big deciding factors. I mean, if you have to kit out thousands and thousands of men, it will, you will immediately start asking yourself, as in, how do you do this without breaking the bank? It's already expensive enough kitting them out with weaponry and whatever. Can we at least save some money on the dye?
Absolutely. The Adam Morgan says, if everyone remembers Yiz the Eunuch, check out their assessment on Iran. We should send love. Feel free. I'm not familiar with Yiz the Eunuch, but feel free to check that out.
Well, I had a thought on Twitter when it came to all the love one ought to send to Iran. And that was that if Mr. Qasem Soleimani was really in charge of all things that were happening abroad, particularly when it came to various Shia militias that acted as Iranian proxies.
Yeah.
I would remind people that our troubles in Basra are not that long ago.
No.
And they were with Shia militias in Basra, which obviously lies right on the Iranian border. And therefore, when Boris Johnson, in this rather understated manner, said we will not be mourning the passing of Qasem Soleimani, you just wonder whether he maybe knows something that we don't.
Quite possibly. At least he wasn't described by Boris Johnson as an austere scholar. Let me
there is that, yes.
Put that out there. The new IKB 4472 says, do the Iranian leadership want to live, or do they want to go to paradise for their 72 virgins? I actually, someone posted the other day when it comes to, this is slightly unrelated, but when it comes to the mentioning of virgins and whatnot, there is a very old, in fact, I don't know exactly when it was, and when I say very old, I mean not this year, show called Revolting, which was on BBC Two, and they did a skit called The Real Housewives of ISIS. And this is, it must have been, obviously, since ISIS became a thing. And you can't imagine the BBC making something like it nowadays. But they have things like, there was a clip of this woman, they've all got British accents, but with sort of like a Bradford twist, right? And they're sitting there in their carbs in the bombed out ruins of a building. It's like, one of them comes in wearing a suicide vest going, look what my husband got me. It's just, and of course it's in the kind of reality TV show thing. So one of them goes, you look amazing. And then it cuts to her in like a private room, which has got a wall blown out. And it says, she looked massive. And stuff like that. And then another one walks in wearing exactly the same suicide vest. And they're having kind of this thing of like, who does she think she is wearing the same vest? She knew I wanted that jacket. And little things like, next time, it's like, oh, my husband got me a new chain. It's 8 foot long. It can almost reach the back door. So that's great. It's like, I never used to have to do this in Birmingham. And you just think, good grief, like, how did that get past the censorious BBC?
There were days when some people in that particular institution actually still had some humour.
Oh, apparently.
But no, when it comes to that question, what do the leadership of Iran want? Do they want to stay alive, or do they want their virgins and go to heaven? I would caution, they are not terrorists. They are in power, and the reason they are in power is because they have sought power. And they like power. They like being in power. And they would like to stay in power for as long as they possibly can. That is the very nature of power. And therefore, I think when it comes to their professing to want to go to heaven, that's one thing. But remember, a lot of people have died in various conflicts with Iran and whatever, And yet these particular men have never been the ones dying. It's always been other people who have been dying for.
Well, Osama bin Laden never strapped on a vest and said, "Fine, I'll do it myself," did he? Right? It's like if someone has to head the snake.
That would be the big comedy moment in a kind of sketch show, wouldn't it? Fine, you're sort of a John Cleese character. Fine, I'll do it myself.
I was unfortunately referencing one of those great superhero movies you hate.
Oh, dear God.
So I'm afraid not. Hikari Manakinito has donated some from Croatia, of all places. So that
Well, if you would have asked me, I would have given your pronunciation here. I would have sort of placed that more in a Japanese territory somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure you can. But we've never had a donation from Croatia before, so thank you ever so much for that. And says, in a very wholesome way, Britisher laughing out loud is always the highlight of any stream. So, that's
well,
you.
There you go. I'm happy to oblige. When it comes, what was it? Hikari Manakinito.
Manakiniko.
Manakiniko. I wonder whether that was what Goran Ivanisevic always mumbled. I don't know. You know how if people sort of swear at Wimbledon and what they get warned by the umpire and possibly get points deducted and whatever. I always felt that Goran Ivanisevic always benefited from the fact that he was Croatian. So nobody actually knew what he was saying.
Oh, I see.
Because at times, I mean, he had a ferocious serve. He was one of the best servers in the game. And of course, he won it famously that one time. But at times, he would you know how they bounce the ball with one hand as they kind of prepare themselves to serve?
Yeah.
As he was in that position, he would sort of and then he would kind of throw the ball up, and he would still be and then the smash,
and then
the
colossal strike.
And you were just always wondering what was it that he was actually saying while he was doing that, as in just which enemy of his was he just currently insulting, if you know what I mean. And in my mind's eye, that Hikari Maracanito or whatever, that to me that's almost now that's what Goran Ivanisevic mumbled always before his service game.
Manakineko, yes. We'll keep that in mind. I do apologise if I am getting the sex of the super chatter incorrect, by the way, because Hikari strikes me as potentially a female name. So, thank you very much for that. And I'm sure you've enjoyed that particular anecdote where Britisher has sussed your true identity. Apparently, chat says that Manakineko means beckoning cat. So there you go.
Oh, well, there you go.
So, and as tennis rackets are made out of cat gut, we know for sure that
must have
been that.
And are you at all familiar with the player I'm talking about?
Not in the slightest.
Not in the slightest. I think it was one of these chaps who. He was one of these chaps who several times kind of made the final, but there was always someone better. Or you know what I mean? He always got close. It was always the semi-final or the final or something, but always one of the big stars always outdid him.
Mm.
And then when he was effectively deemed a spent force and it was all over, and he was no longer really one of the top players, because he was quite popular, because he was such a fiery personality, they gave him a wild card. So they allowed him into the tournament without his, strictly speaking, having qualified.
I see.
And his being the wild card and effectively written off and just there because people liked him, he won the bloody thing, didn't he?
That's fantastic. You know, it's almost like it was an inspiration for Happy Gilmore.
And he went back to Croatia. And he threw all his clothes into the crowd from a balcony, I remember.
Them?
He ended up in his underpants.
Amazing.
Because it was the big thing. Because both Goran Ivanisevic and the Croatian football team had been vying to be the first force to actually win something for Croatia.
Mm.
And it was Goran who did it.
Amazing.
So the Croatians had a very good football team for a while. I think it was Šuker, wasn't it, who was their great star.
You're asking the wrong person.
A few times they came close, but they never quite managed it. And then when it looked as if neither the football team nor the tennis player was going to win anything, suddenly out of the blue, he won the damn thing.
Amazing.
Turned up at home, and he was a national hero. There was just crowds as far as the eye could see. So you don't need to drone an Iranian general to get these kind of crowds out into the street. It's enough if you just win a tennis tournament.
Yes. Well, I hope we all enjoyed that. That was fantastic. The what was it? Last two here. Drake Glazer says, "In the words of a man far wiser than I would rather be lucky than good any day." Do you know the source of this quote, Britisher? That's the question.
No, I don't. What is the source of this? Big silence. So I'm assuming you don't either, or you're as we speak.
There's apparently a member of the New York Yankees called Lefty Gomez. But
why would anybody care about that?
But I was not particularly familiar, I'm afraid, with that one. I would try my best here.
I am sure he was a very wise man. But yes, you can't expect me to be too effusive when it comes to American Rounders.
American Rounders, amazing. DRT is King finally says, "A 20-year-old Britisher was part of 7 Sabaton songs." I'll
have to take your word for it, DRT King, because I have no idea what you're talking about right now.
Alrighty then. I have the last story of this evening, which is Ricky Gervais.
Oh yes.
I think you've been looking forward to this one, no doubt. The 77th annual Golden Globe Awards, which were headed for the 5th time by Ricky Gervais, and he absolutely nailed it. I do implore anyone who hasn't gone and watched that particular opening, which is about 7 minutes long, to go and do it.
And it is pure gold. It is absolutely pure gold. And I think it is the result of... I hate saying this because it's so... Yeah. But I think it's the result of Ricky Gervais having perhaps been a little bit red-pilled.
You don't say!
More than likely due to, recent experience on social media and so on. Because I had seen previous performances of his. I can't say that I saw the last one and whatever, but I saw him, and yes, he was kind of, snippy and at times sort of going for the jugular with one or two of them. But it never quite worked because it never quite had the kind of, how shall we say, the fuel to drive it. But this time round, it was just astonishing because you could see it was more than just him trying to be the snide host.
Yes. There was some real hard-hitting...
There was something behind it, as in, we've had it now. That moment when he tells them, when you get your award...
Yes.
We don't want to hear a political speech.
I will read it. It says, "So if you do win an award tonight, don't use it as a platform to make a political speech. You are in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg. So if you win, come up, accept your little award, thank your agent and your God, and fuck off, okay? It's already 3 hours long. Right, let's do the first award."
It was priceless.
I am not normally a fan of Ricky Gervais, and apart from like a couple of his more seriously minded things, and I thought he was absolutely on point with this sort of thing. I love some of a couple of highlights for me. He goes, "Let's go out with a bang. Let's have a laugh at your expense. Remember, they're just jokes. We're all going to die soon, and there's no sequel, so remember that." It was just
But
going.
he landed blow after blow.
Yeah.
It wasn't just that particular sequence
No.
that you just read out. That was clearly the highlight. But it really was kind of pricking this bubble of pomposity of the lot of them, of basically saying, who do you actually think you are to be lecturing us here?
Yeah. And you took this thing as well about like really bringing to bear this are you really racist or are we really racist sort of thing. So he's going
also that beautiful bit about Apple and sweatshop production facilities, and let's be clear, if ISIS would be producing content, you would be sending in your CV or something.
Yes, or something along those lines.
It was sort of trying to sort of tell them, look, we all know that you are, sort of grasping rats in a barrel, trying to get to the top. That's all fine and well, but don't lecture us about morality.
Yes, he doesn't want another Meryl Streep moment from the...
Precisely. It was divine. And the thing I would compare it to, it wasn't as elaborate as this. There was that one moment when... Do you remember the time when Have I Got News for You was relevant?
Yes.
Long, long ago, there was that moment, and Ian Hislop just momentarily became a saint.
Okay.
Because it was after Princess Diana had died.
Okay.
And for anybody who remembers that experience here in Britain, it was just bizarre. The media just went into overdrive, as in, everybody is mourning. The country is distraught.
The people's princess has been lost.
The people's princess has been lost. Everybody is crying. The heart of the nation has been broken. And everybody in reality was just sitting there going, what do you want about? It just did not affect the nation in the way. There was a complete disconnect. There was no reality in what was being presented in the media.
Mm-hmm.
And at some point during Have I Got News for You, Ian Hislop just basically said, but it's all nonsense, isn't it? And there was this sharp intake of air by the audience. Sort of, oh my God, and he just turned and looked at them and went, but you know it's true, don't you? And it was as if somebody had just stuck a pin in the bubble. Within hours, I mean, the next day, it was dead. He had single-handedly killed the whole phenomenon for the entire nation. Everybody was getting sick of being told how distraught we were, how we were mourning, how we were laying flowers. I'm sorry, yes, there were a lot of flowers, but there are a lot of royal watch.
Yeah.
That's where the flowers came from. When it came to the nation at large, the idea that we were all distraught, it just wasn't the case. None of us were jumping up and down, if you know what I mean.
No.
But everybody was fairly indifferent towards it. And I don't mean this in a sort of cold-hearted manner.
Yes,
it just didn't... if the Queen dies, given her standing in the nation, that will have a serious effect. There will be a moment when the nation stops.
Mm.
That was not the case with Lady Diana's death. I'm sorry, it just wasn't the case.
I think it will happen when Liz kicks the bucket, as it were.
Yeah, as I say, I think she is a person of such standing in the nation, given the fact that most of the nation can't remember a time when she wasn't queen.
Yeah.
That in itself, she is part of the reality of the whole place. But at that particular time, it was on a comedy show that Ian Hislop kind of just completely made a joke. Nobody quite dared to kind of acknowledge it, and he kind of turned at the turned to the crowd and just said, "Well, but I'm right, don't you?"
Yeah.
And as if by magic, the whole thing was gone. And in that regard, what Ricky Gervais did there reminded me a bit of what Ian Hislop did. Because,
Yeah.
I mean, consider it. The entire media is effectively on a war footing. Everybody is mourning. Lady Diana has died. This is a terrible moment. And somebody actually on the media dares to say, no, it isn't.
Yeah, what
Now,
everyone's saying, actually thinking.
If he wouldn't have connected in the way he did with the public, his career would have been over at that moment. Do you understand?
Yeah, because it was a risk.
To shreds. But because he was where the people were, he just instantly killed it.
Yeah.
He pricked the bubble and it was done. And it will just be interesting to see to what extent Ricky Gervais has done that.
I think with the accelerating speed of the news cycle, that it won't potentially have quite as dramatic an effect as all that.
I know what you mean. I mean, it won't have that significant effect, but the fact that somebody has actually stood in front of the lot of them and told it to their face is something which is very difficult to kind of pretend never happened.
Yeah. And you wonder to what degree, obviously, because obviously the Golden Globes is an award show for actors. It's not for the public, really. I mean, who cares apart from them? And he points that out as well. And so the thing that Golden Globes will be remembered for, as it were, will be for his opening, not for anything else.
Nobody will remember who won anything. Everybody will remember, for that was the time when the host told the entire gathered elite what he thought of them.
Well, there we go. And with that, I think we're going to come towards the end. The Mad Mercenary says, 20-year-old Britisher was the last man off the hood. Do you know what that means, Britisher?
I suspect that this is not meant in the spirit of something that the academic agent would recognise, but that actually refers to a certain ship.
Oh? You're going to have to expand for me, man. I'm lost.
Well, it wasn't the Hood one of the ships involved with was it the Bismarck or was it the Tirpitz? I'm not sure.
I'm not that familiar with it, unfortunately.
Well, it could even have been the Graf Spee, for all I know. And I'm not that up to speed on Second World War naval battle.
Well, I shall have to appreciate that the Mad Mercenaries.
I mean, no doubt he's going to tell us, how completely wrong I am, and he's actually referring to another HMS Hood somewhere in the 17th century or something like that.
Some such thing.
I mean, they did rotate the names. Certain names come up again and again and again. I don't know if you know about that.
Yeah.
If they have a name that, particularly the famous ones, that they just rename sort of the next class of ship. They just rename another ship with the same moniker.
The Hood was blown up by the Bismarck.
There you go.
So there's that. It was sunk by the Bismarck. You were the last man off, apparently. So there we go. Thank you for that.
No doubt I left in an arc under it.
You left in a what? Sorry, you cut out for a second there.
No doubt I left in an arc.
I see.
By the sound of it, yes.
Goodness me.
Kind of propelled upwards and then slowly descended in a sort of curving trajectory.
DRT is King says, Sabaton is a Swedish power metal band that sings about military history. They just recently released a World War I concept album of note for a 20-year-old Britisher. So
well, there you go. See, we have been educated.
Well, certainly you have.
But then again, I kind of wonder: would it be Sabaton, or would it be pronounced in some bizarre way?
No, it's Sabaton.
Because the Swedes, they've got these various things, haven't they? Like a little circle over the A and things like that to indicate various different sort of accents and umlauts.
I do believe it's just Sabaton.
Kind of boring.
So, well, there you go.
I am
the
trying
Britishers,
to make an effort.
The Britishers' message to Sabaton to sort their name out so that they're more entertaining. thank you very much, everybody, for listening in and for coming along for this evening. And I leave you with news that.
The town crier is at it again.
You should, I'm referencing that we are the new Have I Got News for You, but I leave you with news that you should like, comment, and subscribe on this episode and let us know what you'd like us to talk about next time. And we'll see you in about a week. Take care, everyone, and good night.
Toodle pip.